With loops, we see 2.5 times more profit being generated over 30 months, over the first 30 months of a kid's bike, comparing it with a normal, let's say, B2B sales model.
We're afraid that these subscriptions would actually really cut into the normal sales that they had. And through all of their statistics, they estimated that only 2% of their sales had been cannibalized by this.
Welcome everyone, my name is Garima and I'm here today with Florian from P2S and Scott from Circuli. They've joined me today to discuss the up and coming topic of transitioning from sales-based to service-based business models, also commonly known as subscription-based business models. Together, but mainly Scott and Florian will be answering some of the most commonly asked questions related to this topic, while sharing some real-life business examples that they know from their experiences from running the two companies. Now let's start with you, Florian. Why don't you tell us a bit about yourself and your work at P2S?
Hi, Garima. Hi, Scott. Glad to be here today. Thank you. Yes, I'm Florian. I'm half German, half French, working in Brussels, and I got into subscription and product as a service business models 7 years ago. I wrote my master thesis about product as a service business models in the manufacturing industry and focusing on how companies transition from one-time sales models towards subscription models. And then launched P2S Management Consulting. P2S stands for Products to Services, Products to Subscriptions, and we're a boutique consultancy specialized in subscription and product as a service business models, and we exclusively work with manufacturers of physical products, and we help them transition on their journey towards conceptualizing, introducing to the market and scaling product as a service initiatives. So this is, let's say, my main hat at P2S, but also 1 year ago, we launched a second company, which is called Loops Bike, Loops with a Z at the end, .bike, and which is a subscription service for kids bikes. So as a parent, you don't need to buy new bikes every 1 or 2 years for your kids that grow up so rapidly. You can subscribe to them and kind of swap them, exchange them as they grow older. And we're a proud client of Circuli there as well. So all our IT backend is based on Circuli.
So yeah, thanks for the introduction. And that is a pretty good segue into, first I'll say a few words about myself. Originally, Portuguese and American mix, although I've lived in Germany for the last 20 plus years. So a bit of an intercultural mixture all the way around. And citizen of the world more than any specific nationality. In terms of, my work experience, been involved in e-commerce for well over 2 decades now, focused primarily on sort of marketplaces, online marketplaces like Amazon, eBay, etc. Had my own agency and consultancy for almost 15 years, helping major brands and sellers to expand internationally. And basically exited that business, sold that off, and started to, was looking for something a little bit new, wanted to definitely go into the sustainability area. And Circuli was really sort of a perfect match. That was back in 2023. Circuli is now 5 years old. So when I jumped on board 2 years ago, it was, at that stage where it was really transitioning from a startup to a scale up. And my experience hopefully fits very, very well with Circuli in that area. So in terms of what Circuli is a B2B SaaS that really enables websites to offer their products on long-term subscriptions or long-term rentals. And primarily we focus on physical products, just like Florian mentioned before, like bikes. Right. And Circuli really creates, by doing this, we create new whole revenue streams for clients and gives them a whole bunch of possibilities on what to do with their products, especially if they have, higher price products, higher quality products. And at the same time, we're helping them become more sustainable naturally. Right. And that's not only good for the environment, but that's also really, really good for these producers of these, in this case, bicycles or sellers of bicycles.
Cool. Thank you for telling. So what we can gather from both of the intros of the companies is that both of you are talking to tons of companies on a daily basis. So let's start with you, Florian. What can you tell us about some of the biggest motivators that are driving companies to basically try out this business model? So why even go into the direction in the first place?
Yeah, Garima, thanks for the question. Perhaps I'll look at the provider point of view, so kind of the manufacturer provider point of view. And there, what we see from the discussions that we have with the clients. By the way, we've worked on 35 projects so far, so we've had a bit more than 35 clients. In our history at P2S for the last 6 years. So what we see there is that the predictability and the recurring revenue aspect is definitely very interesting. So it gives stability to a business. There's companies such as Hilti, for instance, the power tools, the red power tools. They have more than 80% of their business, which is recurring. So this is definitely an interesting point, an attractive point. But then also you monetize the complete life cycle of products. I think what's important in, let's say, a traditional sales model, usually you sell and then, if I may say, you forget a product. Here you don't sell, you retain ownership usually. Perhaps there's certain, let's say, financing schemes behind it, but the monetizing the complete life cycle is very important. Then there's another point, which is the sustainability aspect. So from a provider point of view, I mean, there's stronger and stronger pressure from policymakers on sustainability. So product as a service business models are definitely by nature good in that respect, because it's incentivized to use resources more efficiently. But perhaps another last point I want to share also, it speeds up the sales cycles. To give you an example, we work with a client in a manufacturer of medical devices in Switzerland. And so they're selling to large organizations, to like the JSK, the Pfizers, the Roche out there. So big organizations that do have the money. Let's say money is probably not the main issue. But what they saw is that product as a service procurement allowed them to speed up the sales cycles a lot and not ask their N+5 in order to get approval. So this is a point which is both a benefit from a customer point of view, but also from a provider point of view. But Scott, I think you have some other views also that you could share on this, no?
Yeah, absolutely. And I really like the concrete examples that you're giving there, Florian. I think I would maybe sort of bring it back up to like 10,000 feet a little bit and give more of sort of a generalistic, like what are the general reasons, what are the motivators for companies to shift into the subscription model? And there's so many of these, right? But if we break it down into three major ones, the first one is really consumer driven, right? So consumers, even if they don't necessarily have the money, right, to buy the top end products, they still want those products, right? And we have a lot of clients who actually, use subscriptions as a way they do a lot of things with it, right? But one is try before you buy, right? Great example was there was a client who had really top end e-bikes, electric bikes. And yeah, they basically, but when you have prices that are going up to like 10,000 euros, yeah, it's a pretty dime to pay for that, and not a lot of people will pay for that out of pocket, especially without trying it first. So by offering subscriptions, does offer this try before you buy thing, and once they've tried it, then they realize they can't live without it, and then they'll buy it. But I think it's not only that high end stuff, but also as I myself just got the newest Google Watch, right? Technology advances so quickly, right? And it makes sense to actually get this on a subscription, right? Because they just released the last Google Watch, less than a year ago, right? And they're going to introduce a new one in the next couple of months, right? So that type of thing, you can basically put the onus on the manufacturer to be refurbishing this stuff, but at the same time, I can always have the newest watch, for example, right? As an example. Convenience, right? In terms of, I just used it, the example of the watch, right? But in terms of like gardening equipment, right? And seasonal products, It's so convenient just to be able to get these for a season and then send it back. And goodness knows the manufacturer of a lawnmower can maintain it much better than I can, right? And I think then that sort of like shifts into these company factors, right? We have a number of companies that are actually, they say that they're making 3, 4, sometimes 5 times the amount of profit by subscribing out, renting out that, for example, lawnmower on a long-term basis, because they are able to maintain it and then rent it again, right? And they're making, let's say, 70, 80% of the price on a long-term rental, but then they maintain it, and then, yeah, they can put that through multiple cycles and then make the money back, and more, right? There's also external factors, some of which you already mentioned, Florian, and those include things like regulations, right? Governments, and then increasingly this, there's so many regulations coming up just to limit environmental impact, and those will only increase over time. So, yeah, those are some of the first ones that come to mind.
Yeah. And some of the ones that you mentioned are also very popular among the consumers, right? So like we talked about bikes a bit. So maybe like a fun fact here. One of my first subscription products was actually a bike from Swap Treats, mainly because of the maintenance aspect of it. So since I was like doing the like a job that required like a bike, Lieferando basically, like as a student job. So it was very convenient to basically just subscribe the bike and outsource the maintenance to the company, because they can deal with their bike best. And I think this is also one reason that subscriptions are very popular among customers, because they see this as a way to, like, a hassle-free way to consume products. So just adding the customer perspective also in there. Florian, you already also talked about and mentioned some companies that you've worked with. This brings one question that we get frequently asked from customers in form submissions and so on. Does it make sense for my industry? So could you maybe start with what are some industries that are best suited for the product as a service, subscription-based business model?
Yeah, Garima, good question. Perhaps I'll try answering this perhaps from a B2B perspective a bit more. I think Scott, you're very well placed to talk about consumer goods more. So talking about like B2B space, we've worked, I think, in 19 different industries, 19 or 20 different industries. So there's quite a lot. Perhaps to mention a few, like HVAC equipment, so heating, ventilation, air conditioning, so everything related to air quality, temperature. This is definitely something where we see a lot of traction. Bigger machinery, let's say injection molding equipment, so in order to form plastic bottles, or other, let's say, pieces. Then there's another one, which is healthcare and medtech. So those are big, let's say, MRI diagnostic equipment. Or if you go to the dentist, the chances are high also that you're sitting on a subscribed to, let's say, seat chair. There's another industry where we see a lot of traction, which is kind of mobility and energy management. So energy management and mobility, these with EV, let's say, being more and more popular, chargers, batteries, data centers, energy efficiency equipment. So those are industries where we see that our clients have success in promoting product as a service business models towards their clients. But if we look at it a bit in a more larger scale, things that run, where there's kind of a running engine, something is happening within a product, those are products that are usually well suited, and those where there can be a lot of energy savings also. So those are topics where if there's a lot of energy savings happening, if we look at say Philips with the lighting industry, for instance, like LED lighting so lighting as a service, those are things where there's energy savings behind it, and which is quite well suited for as a service or subscription based offerings. But this is more on the B2B side. Hope that helps, Garima.
Yeah, I think there's definitely some overlap between P2 the industries that P2S serves and the industries that Circly serves. Maybe Scott, you want to talk about some of the industries that that we commonly see at Circly.
Sure. Yeah. And Florian, I think it's good that you make that differentiation between B2B and B2C. So as you said, Garima, there does tend to be some overlap there, but it's funny whenever we get that question of who do we serve, just like yourselves, we've noticed an explosion in the breadth of industries, right, that are taking advantage of subscriptions, right, and product as a service, right. So we like to say from toys to Teslas, and pretty much everything in between. As a matter of fact, our two biggest categories do tend to be mobility, and then also kids and baby. Right. So starting off with mobility, you already touched upon this, right? But literally like bikes, right? Bike subscriptions where, kids basically get bigger bikes as they grow, to e-bikes where they're really high quality and really expensive. And it's just better for the consumer to get them for a season, right? Instead of to buy them outright. But then pretty much anything with wheels on it, right? Also scooters, anything you can imagine there, all the way up to car rentals and Teslas. And as a matter of fact, we actually do have a client that rents out Teslas. Kids and baby, right? So this is just one of these categories, which just makes inherent sense, right? Anybody who has children knows how quickly they grow out of things. And this includes everything from what you would have for a small baby, including a baby carriage, right? Which is something you typically use for only like 12 to 15 months before sticking it in your garage in the past. Now you can simply send it back, and then they can refurbish it, make some, small repairs to it, and then send it right out to the next parent. So mobility, kids and baby tends to be our biggest ones. But then it really, there's everything from sort of sports equipment, right? So everything from skis to stuff that you would have in your yard for a season, right? To gardening and garden furniture, right? Different equipment that you may not want to buy outright, like a snowblower, right? Even to things like, like a mobile sauna, like a mobile whirlpool, things like that you can rent for shorter periods of time. And then that includes also things like furniture, right, for indoor use. That can be everything from, in Sweden, we have a client who rents out furniture on a long period of time per semester to students, right? And they rent out whole, effectively rooms, right, to students, which makes a lot of sense, or even couches long term, right? And then, Florian, you also mentioned medical devices, right? Defibrillators, things like that. Public buildings have to have them, but it doesn't really make sense to buy these things because they have to be maintained on a regular basis. So why not subscribe to them? And the list goes on and on. I think the only thing that I would add to that is also what we call consumables, right? These are the typical things that you would get on an Amazon subscribe and save subscription, right? So diapers, razors, right? Anything that you use on a monthly basis makes a lot of sense to have a subscription to, right? You spend all this money and time trying to get that client in. You might as well keep them by locking them into a subscription.
Yeah, perhaps one thing which I wanted to add also, it's very well that you mentioned this with like consumables. This is something we see in B2B as well. Like there's like equipment subscriptions or like consumables or spare parts. This is also something where kind of spare parts. There was a client of ours, they do like industrial mixers, let's say, and in those mixers you have, let's say, a thing going around that scrapes the food so that it doesn't stick, let's say, to it. And those are of course very high margin products for from a provider point of view, which needs to be exchanged every now and then from a quite regular point of view, from our the regular interval, sorry. And so they're quite keen on being offered on a subscription. So this is something, but then we also see components being offered on a subscription. So if, let's say, you take a vehicle, and only the battery is being offered on a subscription, for instance. So this is also, it's not a complete thing, it's only part of something bigger. We see the same also in injection molding. So it's not the complete injection molding machine being offered as a subscription, only kind of the hard piece itself. But then what we see also is, of course, the software part. So there's still a lot of manufacturers that give away for free their software, their telematics behind it. And so the first step into subscriptions is usually kind of, okay, we start with offering digital product software on a subscription basis, or software as a service, before perhaps moving into fleet as a service, equipment as a service, as we know it. So there's also those different distinctions, these different scopes that we see on the B2B market out there.
Cool. A lot of information. You both mentioned tons of industries that are adopting this, already doing this, the various motivations behind why an industry is already doing this. There are probably various factors or reasons why some are successful and some are not. I think we want to focus here on the success side of things, at least in the beginning. Can you share some examples of companies that have successfully made the transition, and what lessons can we basically learn from their success that can basically, be like adopted by other players who want to do the same thing?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think I would probably start by mentioning a couple of generalities, right? Which I feel like that can sort of help to address, I think, maybe the larger listening audience, and then maybe go into some more examples. And I know, Florian, I know that you're always good for some really concrete examples. But one question that we get very often when somebody is, they already have this model where they're just selling and they're thinking about it going into subscriptions, but they don't know exactly how, and they don't know the potential for success. I mean, some of the statistics that we generally share with them are things like, we just say exactly what's been happening over the last couple of years with us. And specifically over the last year in 2024, we actually had a 65% growth in our client base, right? So that many more clients. And there's really more and more companies that are seeing value, right, in this whole subscription model. And that can be all different types of models, right? Some of which we've already described and some of which I'll go into. We've also had a 62% year-on-year increase in subscription GMV. So that's the typical client that we have is having 62% more GMV than in the previous year. Right, so that's some decent growth. If you imagine if you had that in sales, you'd be quite happy, right? And I dare say too that that is sort of low for some of the more successful businesses that we're seeing, where they're doing over 100% growth year on year. And this is nice too, because whereas in terms of sales, markets are pretty saturated, right? It's not like you can snap your fingers and then all of a sudden sell 50%, 100% more. But the subscription market is relatively new, right? And a lot of people don't have competitors that are doing it yet, right? So there's a lot more opportunities for growth. And in general, for how much revenue boost have we had per client? On average, that was 90% per client last year. So there's a lot of money to be made. Now, what types of successes have we had concretely? I've mentioned a couple of the models already, right? Where we have e-bike manufacturer. They were just selling their products before. And once they started subscribing, right? A couple of interesting things came out of that. Number one, they now have absolutely huge sales. Obviously, NDA wise, I can't share how much, but they're doing extremely well. one thing when I sat down and chatted with them last year is they said that originally they were a little bit concerned about cannibalization, right? They were afraid that these subscriptions would actually really cut into the normal sales that they had. And through all of their statistics, they estimated that only 2% of their sales had been cannibalized by this. But of course, the profit of doing like this massive increase in subscriptions, that absolutely dwarfed that 2%. So they said absolutely doing, and the fact is, you look across the industries and there's more and more of this stuff. So don't worry about cannibalization is what I'm saying. In terms of a baby carriage manufacturer that I mentioned earlier, they're making actually 4 times the amount of profit than they would in comparison to just selling that product, again, because it's high quality and they can put it into many, many sales cycles, right? Many subscription cycles. Medical devices, there's all types of opportunities to be doing everything from like dental to medical to seasonal products. All of these you can see a lot of success with. But I think that's actually a pretty good transition over to you, Florian.
Well, Scott, thanks. Those are inspiring examples. And so kind of perhaps I'll share one example, which is ourselves, what we have with Loops, with the kids bike subscription. And I have 5 examples in mind on more kind of client side, B2B side. With Loops, we see 2.5 times more profit being generated over 30 months, over the first 30 months of a kid's bike, comparing it with a normal, let's say, B2B sales model. So 250%, but over 30 months. So it does take time, but it's more profitable, let's say, and customers, parents are happy with it as well, of course. So this is on the Loop side, but then I have 5 other examples in mind. We worked with Philips. So Philips back in 2016, they had a lot of, let's say, commoditization pressure for light bulbs, LEDs, let's say, which got more and more commoditized, and so they came up with lighting as a service, light as a service, where instead of selling lighting equipment, they would guarantee functioning light and illuminance level per square meter, right? And so kind of they have been very strong. And what I want to mention with them is they work a lot in public procurement in the public space, and they were very strong with advocating for as a service models from a sustainability point of view. And so now there's public tenders asking explicitly for light as a service, and you cannot answer to that tender, you cannot participate if you don't have an as a service offering to bring to the table. So I think this is an interesting one from a Philips point of view. Then Philips, of course, they've split in 2016 into Philips Healthcare and kind of Signify, which is the lighting as a service part. And so Philips Healthcare offers medical imaging on a pay-per scan basis. So instead of selling the MRI scanner, for instance, they are getting paid per patient that has been treated. So sometimes they call it the paper shot model. Also, so this is about Philips Healthcare, but Fujifilm Medical Systems, they have done exactly the same as well. And then going back in time, none of us was born, but 1962, Rolls-Royce with the turbines, so not the cars, but kind of the airplane turbines. So instead of selling them, they started offering them as a subscription as well. And so if you're taking a plane, and by the way, they have more than 50% market share in the kind of passenger segment, so it's very likely that this will be a Rolls-Royce plane, and this is subscribed to. So the airline companies, they don't purchase them, they subscribe and they pay per flying hours. So I think this is the very interesting part here, in which I really like about those as a service models, is that it allows to align the incentives of your customers with the ones of the provider. And kind of customers, airline companies, they want to fly passengers from point A to point B. This is then also the pricing metric of the provider from Rolls-Royce. So I think this is a very interesting case and have been going strong for more than 60 years now. GE followed suit quite rapidly, showing that it was probably an interesting business to be in, let's say. Two other examples, CAESA compressors, but Atlas Copco is doing this as well. So we're talking air compressors here. And so they went away from selling air compressors towards offering cubic meters of compressed air, right? So you don't pay for the air compressor anymore, you only pay for the outcome that you get of the air compressor itself. So this is a very interesting case. And then we have, well, I'll say one other example, what it's in the cooling industry, but there's two different companies. There's Energy Partners based out of South Africa, and then there's Care in Singapore. They both offer cooling equipment from a different different types of equipment, but essentially they guarantee a certain temperature to their clients. So you're not interested in getting the cooling equipment with all the installation, all the consumables behind it. You're interested in getting -5 degrees or 21 degrees or whatever desired temperature. So those are examples. In the case of Care and Energy Partners, you can only subscribe to something. You cannot buy something anymore there. If I recall correctly, they have more than 80 million euros or US dollars under management as a subscription. And so it's working quite well for them. They are also winning prizes from a sustainability point of view, from an innovation point of view. So yeah, those were, sorry for the long answer, but those were a few examples.
Yeah, there are many lessons to be learned here, and both of you have circled back on a few things. So one of them being sustainability. I think this was very clear in both of your examples that sustainability tends to be a core of this business model, if not the primary thing. And I guess what I can also understand from your answers is that not forgetting that will pay itself in the long run. This was quite evident from your example with lighting at the service and the tenders, the whole tender topic. So and then another thing is that related to cannibalization, I guess there are many consumer-facing businesses that worry about this, but we've seen this time and again that they don't need to worry about this and they can just do business as usual. So you mentioned some very big names, and you also mentioned that with Loops you see the 2.5 times the revenue or the profit, but you see that coming in over 30 months. Let's talk a bit more about how going from CAPEX-heavy business model to OPEX-based business model, how does that impact the financials of a company or the financial health of a company?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think it's important to understand the problem, let's say, or the big challenge or the opportunity, as let's say, with subscription-based business model. If you want to start offering them, it means as a company that someone needs to pre-finance the equipment, right? And so you will have rising costs at the beginning, decreasing revenues because you don't get the cash up front, you get it over time. And so what starts forming is kind of a fish belly, right? We call it the fish model. And at a certain point, those tendencies will invert, and kind of the route to profitability is going to be there. But this transitionary period, well, you need to solve this. So either you have a lot of cash yourself, and you kind of can use your cash and decide to use your cash to pre-finance the equipment yourself, and so kind of you do it in a gradual perspective. Usually, as a manufacturer, you would not stop selling equipment, so you would go at it gradually, and you could be using your own cash until you recuperate it, or you could be setting up financing structures. So usually what we see there is kind of a sale and lease back type of scheme, which is happening, where you would be selling your equipment to a financier. They would purchase it from you, so you would get the cash upfront, but they would lease it back to you. You add your services, your software to it, so you bundle hardware, software, services into one pack and offer it as a subscription to end customers. The advantage with this is that it can be, Garima, to your point, it can be OPEX, it can be off balance sheet. So there were quite some big changes in 2019 with IFRS 16, where leasing needs to figure on the balance sheet. And those, let's say, constructs allow it still to be off balance sheet, which can be very attractive from a customer point of view. So this is phase number 2 so we said you finance yourself or gradually. This is first phase. Second phase, you use external financiers, but what we see being the goal usually, and kind of the companies successful out there, they do it like that. Third phase is creating a special purpose vehicle, so which is a financing entity which then you own, or you own partly as a provider. And the only purpose of this is that it finances the assets. It's a standalone entity. So if we take the example of Groover, for instance, a German Berlin-based company, subscriptions for consumer electronics, and if I'm not mistaken, they're a unicorn, quite successful with it. They've also kind of set up different financing vehicles, and this is something we see with our clients as well. We help them set up different financing entities, and sometimes it's one entity per geography or per product type. So there's different phases from a financing point of view, and then from a taxation point of view, as I mentioned, yes, it can be off balance sheet, which has, if you talk to CFOs from a client point of view, they're usually very much interested in having an asset light structure, meaning not having to keep, let's say, a lot of equity in the company, so that they don't necessarily need a big debt portion, and so the debt to equity ratio is not being deteriorated. So yeah, those are some reasons. Hope that helps.
Yes. In your experience, Scott, do you think this is something similar in the B2C sector, or how is the topic of like investing now but getting the revenue over the next few months in the B2C sector?
Yeah, I think it's sort of similar to what Florian described. I think there's a lot of the same challenges there. Yeah, I think you described it pretty well, Florian. One thing that sort of came to mind were a couple of different sort of examples where, that I'm seeing actually just sort of personally, and then just some other examples which I think are worth mentioning. I find it pretty interesting that at this point I'm looking at getting solar panels on my house, and we're getting 3 offers, and one of the offers really stood out from the other ones in that they very much, like, when they gave us the offer, they only mentioned that you could subscribe to these solar panels, right, for 20 years. And it was only when I asked to see whether I could buy them that they said, oh, sure, you could buy them, but you don't want to do that. And then when you look into the numbers of it, you can understand, because it's actually a very lucrative business model, not only for them in terms of the money they're getting for the solar panels, but also the fact that they control the energy, right? And then the excess energy they can also like sell into the grid, and they can make money from your solar panels effectively on your house. So, and at the same time, right, if I was a house owner and let's say I didn't have the capital to buy those solar panels, it would make a lot of sense for me just to rent them, to subscribe to them over the next 20 years, right? They also take care of maintenance and things like this, stuff that I don't want to mess with, and stuff that they can easily cover. So I think that's sort of a great model there. Maybe I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. Perhaps just jumping back on that point, Scott, what you're referring to here is those ESCO companies, so energy service companies,
Yes.
Which are not necessarily manufacturers. Usually kind of they purchase solar panels elsewhere or other types of energy efficient, let's say, equipment, but they act as a financier, they act as a project manager, they act as maintenance people, let's say organizers, they probably outsource this to installers. Perhaps they have their own installers, but this is a quite lucrative business to be in. And so what we see from a P2S point of view is we see manufacturers willing to transform into ESCO players, because as a service and subscription-based models are just perfect for this.
Yeah, I'm still looking forward to the day when I see more and more solar panels on the roofs of Germany. And I do believe like subscriptions for solar panels could have a huge role to play in that. That's just a small note in between. Scott, you mentioned various characteristics of a solar panel as a product that makes it very good as a subscription product. What do you think are some other product characteristics that make a subscription model viable?
Right. And, really trying to address the listener here who's maybe thinking, okay, are my products, great for subscriptions? Yeah. There are some telltale characteristics. A couple of the standard ones, if you have a high quality product, if you have a more expensive product, right? Those are things that tend to be harder to sell. At the same time, if you have them at a little bit lower price point on a monthly basis, then generally you can subscribe them out pretty well, because especially if you have a reputation, right, for having that good quality product, people want them, right? It's usually just an affordability question. So some other key product characteristics, if your product needs maintenance, right, or after sales services, right, that's absolutely great. I think both Florian and I mentioned examples of this, right? Everything from like a lawnmower that I may not want to maintain at the end of the season, to sporting equipment, things like that, like more technical products. Products that can be frequently upgraded. I gave the example of a watch, right? If you're the type that always wants the newest stuff, then companies like Grover, Florian, as you mentioned, are great ways just to subscribe to products, right? Bikes end up being, they fit into sort of both of those categories as well, right? You can get new technology with bikes, right? And at the same time, you don't have to maintain them all the time, right? And then also like products that are needed for a specific purpose, right? Or a certain, certain reason that you would have it for like a hobby or like a seasonal product or something like that, right? Something that people may not have, let's say for years, but just want to try out. That can be great as well. And a couple other last things, popularity on a secondhand marketplace. This is one thing that we tend to tell our prospects is, if you see your products on a secondhand marketplace on a regular basis, that's usually a telltale sign that it is good quality, it is being resold, and you should take, should get a little bit of an advantage from that. So, and Florian, how about yourself? Actually, what are some of the key characteristics that you see?
Scott, you all the ones you mentioned, I was like, yes. So no, definitely agree with all of them. Perhaps one which I can add is the connectivity aspect in B2B products mostly. So if you want to retain the responsibility for your products, for your industrial dishwasher, for instance, well, you want to make sure that there are certain sensors in it so that you can remotely monitor the health and the state of your equipment. Of course, this doesn't make sense for cheaper products. You're not going to put sensors in kids' bikes, for instance, but for more expensive, let's say, industrial equipment, this makes a lot of sense. So this is something we see that I cannot stress enough. If I look at the 36 clients we had or we have, every single one of them is in the high end of their niche. So it's always high quality equipment, because if it's not high quality, then you're in trouble for subscription business models. So this is why we see a lot of premium manufacturers, premium providers being interested in subscription-based business models. But all the reasons you mentioned, Scott, I fully support them.
Yeah, so I think the core here is that it needs to be high quality because it needs to go through multiple users. And a bad quality product cannot do that because it would break either with the first user or even like before that. So I think that's a very important aspect that that makes a product subscription viable, let's say. Moving on to the customer perspective, or rather that how can a company understand if this is the right time for them to jump into this, if their customers are ready, if there's demand. So what would you say are some tells that they can look for in the market, in their research when exploring this topic? So let's start with you, Scott.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, this really, I think there's a potential in so many different industries, right? In terms of being able to do subscriptions and long-term rentals. It's one of the first things that we like to consult our prospects on. Sometimes people have already started these pilot projects. Sometimes they have full-fledged businesses that they've been subscribing stuff out for some time, and they just need, in our case, to upgrade to Circuly to be able to manage and really scale that business, right? But that's one of the first things that we do with them is consult on exactly how to really explode that business, right? And some of the things that we're looking at is there sort of existing demand, right, for variable pricing plans, right? If you get asked that, or if you consistently get told that you're, if you get the feeling that you're not selling as much as you can because of pricing, right, that tends to be a pretty clear sign. If you have, really high quality items, right, that you feel like they do go through multiple sales cycles, or you do see them on secondhand marketplaces, right? Those are also some pretty clear signs as well. There's also use cases here too that I would also bring to the forefront that not everybody think of, right? But this links into having high quality products. Just because you have high quality products doesn't necessarily mean that that everybody takes them and loves them and keeps them forever, right? I was speaking at a trade show with somebody at the end of last year who said that they have really great quality products, but the problem was that they get a decent amount of returns, right? Of course, in Germany, you have this long return period, and a number of people would try out the product. For some reason, maybe it just didn't match. They would send it back, and then they couldn't do anything with all of these returns. And they had their corner of their warehouse dedicated to these returns, and they didn't know what to do with them, right? And he said nothing was wrong with these products. Well, the nice thing about offering a subscription is it can be seen as sort of an open box product, right? As long as the quality is there, nothing's wrong with it, you can subscribe that out. And that gave them this opportunity to take what was a real problem, right, and turn it into a huge opportunity. And now they have a like a flourishing business of these subscription products that they couldn't use before. So anyway, wanted to share that.
It's an interesting one, Scott. It's a really interesting case. I never looked at it from that perspective. So it's cool.
I think with these where they say that I don't know what to do with my return products, they still have like a lot of useful, valuable life left in them. And I think from a manufacturer or retailer point of view, it just hurts to throw them away. Also, like, I think the more the topic of sustainability and circular economy becomes important, throwing away is going to just get harder. So whether or not a company wants to, do something good or not, I think eventually they would have to do something better. So I think one thing that I wanted to add regarding how do you evaluate if your customer base is ready or not, like, one, are there competitors in the market that are already doing this? I guess that's something that tells you that if there are, then yes. Then also, like, if your customers hesitate a bit to buy your product, then also like an alternative to purchasing could be very attractive for them. And here there's this perfect example that I experienced myself, was that I was in Decathlon and I wanted like hiking shoes, and I was very hesitant on like, being like, okay, I don't know, like I've never been hiking for like 12 hours or so. How do I know which sole works for me or not? And like, I think the salesperson saw my hesitation and he was like, well, why don't you just take them, you keep them, you try them, and you can return them to me after a month. And yeah, if you don't like them, just return them and you get all your money back or so. I think that was the answer. And for me, like already this was enough to overcome the hesitation of not buying them. In most cases, you would take the shoe home, you would like them, and that's it. So I guess that is also one thing to see, that if your customers hesitate, maybe offering an alternative, in most cases, like subscribe before buy or try before buy, can really help overcome that hesitation. And that's one good example of maybe just saying that, okay, in such cases, maybe there's a customer base for subscription products. Cool.
Yeah, it's a very good point. And perhaps just to add on the readiness aspect, we see in the B2B space a lot of manufacturers that have, let's say, hypotheses, or they think that their customers think in a certain way about subscriptions, but have never confronted them with it. So one of the first things that we do whenever we start a mission, a project, a collaboration, is we go out and speak with their customers and question them in depth about subscription models, why yes, why no, why not, and try to go really in depth of what's behind it, what's driving them, what are the pain points, what do they want more of, what do they want less of, and then see if a subscription model makes sense. It might be that you come to a conclusion it doesn't make sense, and that's totally fine as well.
Yeah. So you said that you interview the customers of your prospects and your customers to see if subscriptions are attractive for them. Besides that, what are some early warning signs that a company may be struggling to implement a product as a service?
Yeah, that's a very good question. There's a few points that come to my mind. Four major points. The first one being a lack of internal alignment and executive buy-in. If the CEO, if the leadership doesn't believe in the project, in the idea of the products being offered as a subscription, there's no way it's going to fly. So this is super important to have this. Another one is a poor data infrastructure, data and, let's say, IT infrastructure. So you want to make sure that you have the proper tools, that you use the proper tools. And kind of here, I can only mention that when we launched Loops, we looked for, okay, what is the best tool out there? Because we need to handle products over time, we need to handle customers over time, and most ERP systems are not designed for that. And so this is why we decided also to partner with Circly, because they can kind of combine those the recurring world, let's say, into the IT infrastructure. But this was the second point. The other one is a resistance from sales teams. Companies, manufacturers, they have been existing for decades. They're used to selling in a normal way, and usually kind of the elephant in the room when we do like workshops with our clients of how would it look if they would be offered as a subscription, then the sales team usually think, how is this going to be impacting my commission and my bonus, right? So big topic, and you probably want to talk about it from the very beginning, because in the end, people think, okay, how am I as a person personally going to be impacted by the subscription model which my company is going to offer to its clients now? And then, as I mentioned before, there's a mismatch between kind of customer expectations and pricing and really the value delivery. So if you promise something to your customer and then you don't live up to your promises, if it's too much marketing fuzz, let's say, behind it, and not enough impact, then your customers are going to see through this and not be a big fan of it. So those are four early warning signs, let's say, that come to my mind. I don't know, Scott, if you've something else that you're thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of those ring true. It's interesting because I think we can sort of draw some parallels and some differentiations between, more of sort of the the focus that I think P2S has and what Circularly has in terms of clientele, right? I think we tend to have two major types, sort of smaller companies and also really large companies that do have those decades of experience selling stuff. And those are the oil tankers, so to say, that are a lot harder to steer. And that's a situation I would completely agree. If you don't have everybody on board, then it's very, very difficult to make that transition in. Ironically, those are the companies that are generally better situated to make that transition because they can rely on their sales income to help finance that transition that we've talked about into more of a subscription basis, right, long term. But if we focus just for a second on these smaller companies, right, these could be companies that are simply smaller and they're trying to transition from purely sales, right, into subscriptions. And then we do have more and more companies that are coming to us that their origin story has to do with subscriptions from the beginning, and it has all to do with sustainability, et cetera. Now, those smaller companies tend to be, they're sort of the very small ship, right, which can be turned very easily. And it really is all about quick decision making and also allocating enough budget to this, right? As we've talked about, it is about making sure that there's enough money there to be able to support this over, especially the first months, right? But maybe coming back to your original question, Garima, I think it's extremely important to realize that not every company has immediate success in this, right? So yeah, there's many ways, right, to achieve a goal, right? And we always like to say, make sure that there's flexibility in your approach. And that could mean that you do see that once you start offering subscriptions, hey, maybe it's not very successful, right, straight away. Take a look at what your competitors are doing. Take a look at your pricing, right? Some companies choose to, do what Circularly can offer, right? We offer that on somebody's current website where they currently sell their e-bikes, for example, you can also offer to subscribe out that e-bikes on the same page. We see a lot of success with that, but some companies actually choose to create a whole new website, right? Sometimes even under a different name for that offering, right? So there's lots of different ways to transition to this. And one thing that I would say is just because it's not working in the beginning doesn't mean that it's failing. It just means that it has to be changed a bit.
I think this is where the swallow the fish model comes from, that you have to wait until those like 30 whatever months. I guess for smaller startups, it can be 24 to 30 months. For bigger companies, maybe less, maybe more. But that was also the model that Florian was talking about earlier, and that's also what you're saying in your words, Scott. So I think the key words here are quick decision making, flexibility, and agility. Can maybe, like, even if there are some warning signs that there's some problem with your implementation, that you can get over them. From here on, I think it makes sense to move on to the $1 million question, which is that, okay, how do I do this? And how to basically start product as a service business model, and what are some really critical building blocks for this business model. So let's start with you, Scott.
Sure, right. And I think this is such an important question, Garima, because for listeners that are out there that are either have not started subscription businesses yet or are transitioning and trying to sort of scale up, I think there's a couple of key components that you need to focus on, right? Why? Because if you don't do this, then your business is simply not going to be scalable, right? It's not a surprise that selling something is completely different than subscribing something out, right? If you sell something, you sell it, you take a credit card payment, you never see the customer again, potentially. Hopefully you do. But with subscriptions, you're going to be seeing them again month after month after month. That's exactly what's the whole point of it, right? But given that longer trend, that longer process that you have with the customer, what do you need, right? So point number one, you need ease of use for both company you, right, as well as the end consumer. Okay, ease of use. Secondly, you need trackability, right? You need to be able to track your product and know where it is, right? Now, that can mean everything from simply being able to track it by a serial number to know it is with customer X in this city, right? To be able to, get payments from them on a monthly basis. That's helpful. And that can be all the way up to, to basically being able to actually track it with a GPS tracker in an expensive e-bike, right? But trackability, that's the second very important point. Automation and scalability, you need those to be there to be able to handle not 50 subscriptions, but 500 or 5,000, right? And this is a typical thing that we see, right? What happens when you start a new model? You open up an Excel sheet or a Google sheet and you start tracking your business on that. And that's great for the first couple dozen. And then given the fact that there's so much more involved in subscriptions, it's just not tenable anymore, right? So make sure that the software that you use is scalable, right? And as automated as possible, okay? That automation also links directly into the ease of use. For example, your client should be able to log into its own user interface to be able to communicate with you, or at least your system, right? Ideally, you want to limit the amount of interaction they have with customer service. But if you have a client login that has everything that they can possibly do with that subscription right there, and that's all automated, that takes all of the heavy lifting off of you later on. And that leads to that last point that I had, which is limit customer service, right? It's a very expensive part of your business. And by offering this automation, you don't have to pay for that.
Those sound like very critical building blocks to me, and definitely something we see with our clients out there as well. Perhaps I can complement this and try to answer this a bit from a different view. I think building blocks is one thing, but what are the phases when you want to kind of get started with this? Perhaps I'll dive into those things. At P2S, what we have is what we call the P2S subscription action plan, and the P2S subscription action plan is divided into 3 major phases, and basically they represent the methodology that we use to guide our clients on this journey from we don't offer subscriptions to our clients to we offer subscriptions to our clients and we scale this. And so there's 3 phases to it. And the first phase is really this conceptualization phase. The second one is actually building the subscription offering, the financing, the IT, the contracts, etc. And then the third one is kind of how do we sell this, the go-to-market basically. And so in the first phase, it's really about finding a concept market fit. So how would your subscription model look like? What do your customers say? What do they like? What don't they like? How much are they willing to pay for this? So really to find a concept market fit, something that is sellable, let's say, where your customers say, okay, yes, we want this, right? So this is the crucial part. And this is the tough part usually. And then the second part, which is usually the most feared by customers, which we think is the easier part, is more building the right infrastructure, the operational infrastructure for it. So who are the right IT partners to partner up with? What do we need in terms of the IT infrastructure? How do we finance this? How does it work from a taxation, from a revenue recognition point of view? How does it work from a legal point of view and risk management point of view? So those are all things that are, if I may say, binary, right? So once you have put them in place, then either they work or they don't work. And if they don't work, you make them work. And if they work, then you can move to the next one, right? So those are the operational building blocks. And then the third one, and this is kind of getting tougher and getting harder again, this is how do you go to the market? How do you design what is very typical to subscription model is what we call the layer model. Land, adopt, expand, renew. So basically, this is your customer journey of a subscriber, right? How do you design your journey, your different plans in a way that they expand from a basic pack to a good pack to a better pack to a best pack, etc. How do we design it so that they can pause or downgrade or cancel a subscription? How do you present subscriptions to your customers? What are the KPIs that you need to track? How do you train, if you have salespeople, how do you train your salespeople on how to sell subscriptions? How do you train your customers on how to procure subscriptions? Because this is something usually we see which is quite tough as well. And so there's just a bunch of, let's say, 25 topics that need to be mastered. And the good thing, I mean, on our case at P2S, we looked into more than 300 successful subscription cases out there. And so kind of we learned from the best practices, what works, what doesn't work, and why not learn from the ones that kind of have figured it out, let's say, in the past, right? And then at Loops, we try to, of course, adapt those principles ourselves for the kids bike subscription. So those are, let's say, type of, let's say, building blocks or phases that we see in every project out there.
The tip here being, don't start from scratch and don't reinvent the wheel. Just look at the playbook and how it's being done, and then you can do the same for your own company. Scott, do you want to add something to that?
No, I think we've tackled pretty much everything. It sounded really good.
So we're nearly approaching the end of our discussion, and I guess next to the most important question about how to start is what sort of technology and operational infrastructure is required to support this business model. Florian, you have a very good B2B perspective on this. I would say that you start, and then Scott can join in later.
Yeah, it's a tough one, this, right? Like what comes first, this chicken and egg thing, right? Do you want to like first have your customers out there? Or do you first want to have the technology up and running? And probably the answer is probably something in between there, right? Perhaps to share, like we had cases with past clients. I don't want to disclose in which industries, but they launched basically subscription models with a spreadsheet with an Excel, and then asked us kind of to, let's say, help them out. And it was quite of a mess, let's say, to keep the track of all the payments, to keep track of where are your products physically, who has them, payments that don't go through, etc., etc. And so quite rapidly they needed a subscription management software, so kind of in order to track all of that. And so what I can just say is, when we launched Loops Bike last year, the kids bike subscription, is we opted directly for Circly straight from the beginning. So we didn't have a single, let's say, spreadsheet for the first orders. The first order came through Circly because just we had seen how much of a hustle and mess it is further down the line if you don't set it up in the right way straight from the beginning. So I think, just the advantage we had is we saw a lot of cases out there, and so kind of we chose it directly, and then it scales better in a more healthy way, in a smoother way. And so I think it's savings you might be doing, or you might be thinking you're doing at the beginning, but kind of you get overtaken by them quite rapidly when things don't go the right way. So yeah, that's my take on this. But Scott, why don't you tell us kind of what, because the audience here, like Circly, they've probably been on the website, heard about it, but kind of what does it do more specifically?
It's a good question, and thanks for your perspective too, because you're really one of the, I think, the few people that has that unique perspective into being able to consult so many different companies and seeing so many different use cases, and at the same time running a business yourself. So really interesting to hear what you've shared there. And you're absolutely right. I think the typical situation that we get is a lot of clients, they've piloted this or they're even running their own business, but they're generally doing it on spreadsheets, right? It's what we typically do, right? When you try something, you start small, you keep the investments limited, and you try to solve problems with people power, right? You hire people in customer service, right? Or people to do the spreadsheets, right? And you think that this will work. And again, that works up to a certain point in time, but thereafter, it just doesn't make sense. And that's where, just like with pretty much everything else in this world, you replace it with software, and you solve that problem. And I want to bring this back to something that we talked about a little bit earlier in the webinar, and that is these main things that you should be focusing on when you're going into subscriptions, right? So again, ease of use, both for yourselves and also your end consumers. You need to track. You want it to be automated, scalable, right? And you want to limit the customer service. And since you brought up Circuly here, Florian, so Circuly offers 3 main parts to our software, right? The first part is a checkout, right? The checkout links directly in to your current website. And what does that do? Well, that offers ease of use, right? It offers lots of different features, everything from basic information that you can put into a checkout to credit checks, right? And everything that you would imagine with a robust checkout. Okay. Then the second part is our Circuly Hub, and that's sort of the lion's share of the software. That's where you, as a business, as Loops, goes to basically run your entire subscription business. Now, what does that give you? Well, it tracks exactly where your products are. It automates the entire process. That includes emails going out, payments being done. If payment doesn't go through, it automatically tries that payment again, etc. And what does all that do? Well, it allows you to scale, right, beyond those 5 or 50 subscriptions, but unlimited. We have literally a good number of clients that have tens of thousands of subscriptions. And then the last part is the customer self-service login, right? And in that portal, all of the end consumers using Loops would log in there, not to contact customer service, right? Because we remember that's expensive, but rather there's a number of automated features in there where they can choose to upgrade, downgrade, return an item, buy the item outright. Whatever it is that Loops chooses that client can do is all ready for them to do there in an automated way, right? And that limits the amount of time that Loops is taking for customer service. So yeah, that's one thing that I would just say, whether you use Circuly or are just trying to go look for a different subscription model, make sure that that those pillars and those values, right, those 5 things that I mentioned are included there, because only in that way are you really going to be able to scale your business big time.
Cool. So from both your talks on B2B perspective and the B2C perspective, some things are clear that launching this business model does require some thinking, does require some effort, and why wouldn't it? Because it's a completely new way of doing business. I can imagine there are tons of companies out there that are just like figuring it out, and there's definitely a role that partners and ecosystems can play to ensure success of these companies. What do you think like this role is? Yeah, Scott, let's start with you there.
Sure. Yeah, it's a really good question. Circuly has been around for 5 years now, and I dare say that we're one of the older companies in the realm, right? And I say that as an example just to say that if you think back 5 years, right, and you think how many subscriptions did you personally have 5 years ago? It probably wasn't many, and the ones that you can think of are probably going to be digital, like Netflix, for example, right? But over the last half decade, right, there's been this explosion of this industry, and with that, there's this natural diversification, right, specialization. So at this point, you have consultancies like P2S, right? You have software like Circuly, right? But beyond that, you have these whole ecosystems you're talking about, Garima. That could be financing, it could be insurance, logistics, return logistics, refurbishment to help refurbish your products if you don't already do that in-house. I would say that there's a relatively robust ecosystem that's already there. And that's okay if you don't know about it yet because you're just getting into this space. But that's where I would really suggest get in touch with experts. You know, I already mentioned our first call when you talk to Circularly is we help consult and help you figure out exactly what form and shape your model could be taking, right? But even better, I think at this point, I would hand the baton over to Florian because, you know, generally people come to us when they know that they need a software. But I think, Florian, you take it at even maybe a level before that, right? Where people are really just trying to figure out, especially big companies, trying to figure out, yeah, what should this look like in a much more general form. Is that right? Like, how would you describe that?
Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Scott. We come in very early on, so it's really this business model innovation where we work together with the intrapreneurs of a given company, kind of those people that dare to think differently for their own company and dare to innovate and kind of question the status quo and kind of how things are being done currently. And so this is usually where we come in and kind of starting off with really this brainstorming workshop of how could a world look differently within our company if we would not sell our products anymore and we would only offer them as a subscription. So it's very early on, kind of this business model innovation. But then Garima, to your point of the ecosystem, and so this is what I was referring to as kind of the first chapter, the first phase, right? But the second phase, this is where it gets into ecosystem partners, because this is where we need financiers out there. This is where we need IT tech partners as Circularly, where you need insurance providers, where you need law practices in order to draft the as a service general terms and conditions and contracts. So this is where you need a CPQ tool in order to present your offers in the proper way to your customers as well, where logistics providers, refurbishment and remanufacturing providers can be there. And so I mentioned before that at P2S, we have built this P2S subscription action plan, but what we also have is the P2S subscription expert ecosystem. And there's more than 20 partner companies. Circularly is one of them. And so those are all partners that are useful in the transformation journey and are supporting and enabling this transformation journey. But there is I think an ecosystem aspect is important. The thing is, there's a lot of companies out there, and so doing the research takes time as well, of course, right? And so kind of getting shortcuts there is something that is quite helpful. This is one thing on the ecosystem. Another one which I want to mention is what we have with our clients is we've built this, call it kind of a VIP subscription enthusiast club. And so essentially it's bringing together our clients, which all have questions or quite similar questions on similar topics. They're all asking themselves, how do we deal with the financing? How do we deal with the contracts, with the pricing, with the IT, et cetera, et cetera? And so kind of organizing roundtables and one-on-one sessions between different clients where kind of they can exchange their experiences without us being in the room sometimes, is something that we see being very helpful to them as well. So this is also, let's say, another type of ecosystem out there.
That's a very cool one, I must say. Right. So we've now moved to the end question, and I would like to ask you guys, how do you see subscription models evolving in the next decade, let's say?
The next decade, I think there's going to be a lot more development in the same way that we have seen over the last 5 years, right? As we just talked about. I think there's going to be more diversification in terms of industries. There's going to be more and more industries using it. Even interesting is that you may not think of. A great example that we're talking with a prospect recently. Even construction sites, right? You may not necessarily think that that's a place where there would be a lot of subscriptions going on, but in this climate where it is actually relatively hard to find construction workers for your sites, right? one great way to be able to get them and actually keep them is to say, you know what, you are always going to have the best tools when you work at my site. And then the person at the person responsible for the site, if they just get tool subscriptions, so the maintenance is all handled, and they can promise their workers, you know what, at the end of every single year, you are going to have the newest, best maintained tools, right? And if they ever break, you know, you're not responsible for fixing them or buying them or anything like that. That's all going to be taken care of under the subscription, right? So there are real marketability, you know, advantages, right, for pretty much any industry you can think of. So I'm also thinking of things like trade fairs, right? Back a couple of years ago, it was difficult for Circuly to find fairs to go to where it really sort of fit, right, as a subscription software for physical products. But slowly but surely, you know, North America, Europe, right, even further afoot in Asia, there are shows coming up focusing specifically on sustainability and subscriptions, right? So I foresee there's going to be a lot more specification and just a lot more companies doing this in general. Florian, what is your take on this?
I think the first thing to say is kind of disclosure. We are biased, of course, right, to the audience, but no. What I see is the policy making, the regulation, and the sustainability aspects are really strong driving factors, which are going to change a lot. Not sooner than I mean, yesterday it was on the 26th of February. There was the European Commission that announced the EU's Clean Industrial Deal, which is basically more than 100 billion investment and support into, let's say, circular economy principles in the industrial space in Europe here. So there's the European Green Deal as well, which pushes a lot, and product as a service are explicitly mentioned a lot of times in it. By the way, we're going to bring out the white paper on that one very soon. So policy making, regulations are a strong driver, but then I think, like, connectivity in general and kind of industry 4.0. I know we've been talking about this for more than a decade already, but there's still a lot of industries where the products are not connected to the internet because customers are not willing to share data, and this comes up a lot of times. And to be frank, I understand end customers. If you're just asking, can I please add sensors to the equipment because I'm interested in that? Well, I would probably say no too. Kind of, you have to come up with something. Okay, I add those sensors to it because I will allow you to save 10% on your energy bill thanks to that. Because I will maintain it in a better way. I will know how to do, when to do the maintenance, etc., etc. So I think the data play is a big one. Everything that you can do with data, which you have collected thanks to subscriptions, in terms of designing your products in a proper way that they are more easily repairable, for instance. This is a strong tendency I see. But it comes back to kind of the European Commission's clean industrial deal or the Green Deal. So it's really like this loop, this driving factor, which is sustainability. On top of that, there's data, and then the last one, which is just the market differentiation. Here in Western countries, we have a lot this problem of, well, other companies from other geographies are getting better and better from a technical point of view. How can we differentiate ourselves? And we do this by with software and with services, and not on the technical aspects of the product anymore. And so business model innovation is definitely one way to look at things. So I'm very positive on subscription models. This is why I launched Loops as well, because I truly think that from a customer point of view, there is also a shift going on. Leadership positions are more and more occupied by younger and younger people, and this will of course increase over time. And people that are used to subscribing to things, which have not been growing up necessarily with the mindset of I need to own everything I use, and so kind of this shift from ownership to usership is definitely something that I can see. It's been 7 years that I am in the subscription product as a service space, and it's definitely something kind of compared to 7 years ago. It's night and day.
Yeah, that's for sure. I think this is also something we experience internally when we talk to prospects, of how the conversation has shifted from why should we do it to wait, can you tell us how do we do this, to like, okay, yeah, we're already doing this now for a few years. Can you help us run, basically? So instead of crawling. So thank you to both of you for sharing your insights. Florian, you from the B2B perspective, and Scott, you from the B2C perspective. And I'd say to everyone who's listening in, hope you found our talk today helpful, and you can take something out of it. If you're looking for more topics like these, please reach out to any of us, and then we can make more awesome videos like this in the future for you.
No. Thank you very much also from my side, Garima, Scott, for the discussion today. So hope it helped and then inspired, hopefully, some people out there to either get started with subscriptions or at least open the dialogue of subscriptions within their company, either within their company, or perhaps they want to subscribe to products themselves, because purchasing is not cool anymore.
Right. I think it's all about information sharing. And I think, really valued your input, Florian, especially from your unique perspective. Garima, thanks a lot for the organization of this. And I hope everybody enjoyed.
Perfect. Thank you. Bye-bye.